Hello again. So, these are problems to help us understand imaginary values in the context of now simplifying radicals. So, we saw a little bit of this before in a previous video, but let's get some more practice with the idea. So, find all the solutions to the following equations, starting with x squared equals negative 16. So, if I have that x squared is equal to negative 16, how I would normally solve for x is taking the square root on both sides of the equation. We got x is equal to, and when we take the square root, we get plus or minus. So we have plus or minus the square root of negative 16. Now, we can do some of these tricks that we did when we were working with square roots earlier. We're going to keep the plus or minus, but we should see that 16 is a perfect square. And we can sort of factor out that negative as a negative 1, where we have negative 1 times 16. We can simplify this just as we did before. So we have plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16. Simplifying this, we know that negative 1 is now considered I, and the square root of 16 is 4. And when we write it out, we like to write it as plus or minus, the real number goes first, so 4 and then I. And that's going to be our solution for x. So, hopefully that makes a bit of sense, especially coming from the previous problems we were working on. Now let's try x squared is equal to negative 24. Well, again, if we take the square root on both sides, and remember our plus or minus, we get x is equal to plus or minus the square root of, and I'm just going to skip it up a couple steps, negative 1 times 24. Now, we have plus or minus the square root of negative 1 times, now 24. Not a perfect square like 16 is, but we can break it down in such a way that, like for instance, 24 is 4 times 6. And I know that 4 is a perfect square. So if we keep expanding this, we have plus or minus. This square root of negative 1 just becomes an I. Then we have the square root of 4 times the square root of 6, which becomes plus or minus I times, well, the square root of 4 is 2, times the square root of 6. And the way we're going to typically write this out is plus or minus 2i square root 6. And that's going to be what x is equal to. So the simplification basically works the same way we're doing it before. Except now, you just have an extra step. Throw the negative in there and simplify it to an I. But it really is the same stuff we have done already.